When Sega released the Master System in 1986, the hope was to pull market share away from Nintendo. The end result wasn't what anyone anticipated. In Japan, the NES outsold the Master System 11-1, while in North America it was outsold 17-1. These are the regions most people seem to fixate on when discussing how dominating Nintendo was in the 80s. However, there were two major markets Sega dominated. In Brazil, the Master System was so popular it maintained over 90% market share, while in Europe and South Korea it outpaced the NES 2-1. These numbers showed Sega that they could win under the right conditions, and with that, work began on their next system codenamed the Mark V. This is Retro Impressions, and we are covering Sega's Mega Drive. As Master System sales stagnated, Sega was already deep into development of its successor. Masami Ishikawa, who had been a part of Sega's home console R&D division since the SG-1000, had assumed the role of team leader starting with the Mark III, and was again tapped to lead the development of what would become the Mega Drive. The goal was to create a system that could more easily emulate the sights and sounds of the arcade, giving an experience at home unlike anything else available at the time. Architectural inspiration was taken largely from Sega System 1, System 2, and the Sega 16 arcade boards, with a lot of effort put in place to replicate these systems in a smaller, more cost-effective way. The highest priority, however, was that the system be backward compatible with the Master System. To do this, its processor, sound chip, and a compatible VDP were included. All the user needed to activate the onboard Master System hardware was a power-based converter that acted as a pass-through device, as the cards couldn't be directly plugged into the system. The project was quite ambitious, with the initial design being an absolute powerhouse. Unfortunately, Ishikawa's inability to meet the price point Sega had set prevented some of the early ideas from making it into the final release. The dedicated rotation and scaling hardware were some of the more notable features to not make it into the final cut, in Sega's effort to keep the Mega Drive within a price point that would be palatable to its customers. In 1987 Japan, NEC in partnership with Hudson released the PC Engine to great success. They were the first to market in the 16-bit home console category, receiving support from development giants Namco, Taito, Falcom, and Sega. A great software library along with their head start would help the PC Engine maintain the top market position until being displaced by Nintendo 3 years later. While the PC Engine enjoyed fantastic sales, the Mega Drive got off to a slow start when it released in October of the following year, nearly matching the sluggish sales of the Mark III. By the time Nintendo launched the Super Famicom in 1990, the Mega Drive had been struggling to sell, and was pushed to third position for market share of 4th generation consoles, a position Sega would never crawl back from in Japan. As the release window approached for the Mega Drive in North America, Sega had just reclaimed distribution rights from a lackluster partnership it had with Tonka, and had zero infrastructure of their own in place for marketing and distribution purposes. Needing someone who understood the American market, David Rosen brought Gene Lipkin on board to serve as president of Sega. Gene seemed like an obvious choice, as he had previously served as president of Atari's successful arcade division, yet for unknown reasons, Lipkin left almost as soon as he took the job, leaving David Rosen in charge once again. As the target launch window closed in, Sega found itself in the identical position they were in while launching the Master System. No infrastructure and no leadership. It wasn't over yet though. There was still one company that seemed perfectly suited to help. A company that once had great success in the North American console market, yet seemed to be floundering without much direction. A company that David Rosen's friend Michael Katz held prominent position at.
Dave Rosen came to Atari and asked if we'd be interested in taking over the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of Genesis. We came very close to making a hefty licensing deal so that Atari could jump into the 16-bit fray before Nintendo. The negotiations went pretty far down the stream, and as I recall, they fell apart when Jack Tramiel and Dave Rosen couldn't agree to the terms. Then Sega decided to do it themselves.
The system would launch in 1989 under the leadership of Rosen, with the decision to maintain the close look of the Master System boxes. A black background with a grid overlay was used in addition to the artwork that better represented the game itself. Just 1 month after the system launched, Michael Katz was brought on board to serve as president of Sega of America. He had extensive experience in the industry going back to 1975, experience that would heavily influence the foundations he would lay while there. Katz began his involvement in the game market while at Mattel, where he helped to establish the portable games category. In 1979, he joined Coleco as head of marketing, where he helped to launch the ColecoVision and was heavily involved in the marketing of their electronic quarterback game. The ad was the first of its kind, taking on Mattel's alternative head-on by pointing out what it did better.
I'm Football One, Mattel's lowest price electronic football game.
And I'm electronic quarterback, Coleco's lowest price.
I run from the line of scrimmage.
I start in the backfield and follow my blockers.
Blockers? I don't have any blockers.
I got 7 men on defense.
7? I've only got 5.
I can even pass.
I can't pass.
My receiver runs short, long, any pattern.
Pattern? I don't even have a receiver.
Or I can score a safe.
The competitive ad worked very well, and its effectiveness would be something that would stick with Katz going forward. By 1983, Katz left Coleco in order to move to the Bay Area, where he would later join Epix, helping turn the small developer into a mass-market company. Under his leadership, he helped grow the company's revenue by over 700% in his first year there. He would oversee the release of the hit games Jumpman, Pit Stop, and Summer Games before leaving in 1985 to join Atari. It didn't make a lot of sense for Katz to leave the company he had put on the map for one that seemed to be floundering, but Katz was convinced that the way forward was through entertainment electronics. At the time, this category included products such as laser tag and Teddy Ruxpin. Epix had no interest in anything outside of computer-based software, yet Jack Tramiel promised to let Katz start a new department within Atari, focusing on just that, if only he would also agree to run their failing video game division. Katz accepted and made major headway on both fronts, but it was an uphill battle against Tramiel, who had no intention of funding anything outside of the budget line computers they were trying to sell. It soon became clear that Jack never had any intention of supporting the new division, and once Atari went public, Katz sold his shares and left. While at Atari, he relaunched the 2600 as a budget console, while spearheading the launch of the 7800 and XE. Having experienced it firsthand, he understood the hardships any gaming console faced going up against Nintendo, who locked most major developers into exclusive contracts.
It was hard to get developer support for the 7800 and XE because we didn't yet have a large installed base, and the developers did not trust Jack Tramiel to okay a big marketing budget to establish 2 new systems.
When Katz came on board Sega of America, all hardware and software development was handled in Japan. This to Katz seemed to be a problem that needed to be addressed immediately. One of the first things he did was hire Ken Balthazar to act as head of development. Balthazar, a seasoned developer having worked for Atari and Exidy, seemed right for the job of bringing American developers on board. Katz felt it was essential that developers who understood their audience were on board with the Genesis, and that effort was put into the development of this kind of content. A lot of money was put forth to build a new line of games that were backed by celebrity endorsements. Pat Riley, Tommy Lasorda, Evander Holyfield, and Michael Jackson were some of the biggest names, but the largest game featured Joe Montana and had a pending release date of December 1990. Katz felt as though Montana was key to Sega's success, having spent $1.3 million up front on acquiring the rights to Montana in a bidding war with Nintendo. In order to push this new line of exclusive games, Katz, inspired by his days at Coleco, authorized an aggressive ad campaign to showcase exactly what Genesis did better than Nintendo.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Collins free.
Genesis does.
What Nintendo?
Electronic Arts' relationship with Sega dates back to 1989. EA, who was founded by Trip Hawkins in 1982 with a primary focus on games for computers, had never published a game on a home console, due in part to memory and hardware limitations. He had a major issue with the new style contracts that Nintendo had made popular, which demanded exclusive rights along with a cut of each game's sales.
All the American publishers avoided the 8-bit Nintendo and had a disdain for their model. None of us at the time appreciated how license fees could be used to subsidize hardware pricing and marketing, and thereby help companies like Nintendo build an installed base.
This opinion changed with the announcement of the Mega Drive. The primary draw for EA was the sheer power of the system and its Motorola M68000 processor. EA had extensive knowledge of the M68000, having ported games to and from systems containing the chip.
We decided that Genesis would do really well, and that we had very appropriate content for it. We did not want to be in this business the way it was currently being run, the way Nintendo did it with that one-sided licensing agreement. and Sega was trying to clone almost everything about Nintendo. I thought, look at what Atari is doing. They had reverse engineered the machine and are selling their own games. If Atari wins that lawsuit, I will open up the market and you won't need to have one of those oppressive licensing agreements.
When the system launched in Japan, Hawkins sent a representative to purchase a Mega Drive and bring it back to California. The idea was to reverse engineer the system and threaten to develop games without a license agreement in order to procure a more lucrative deal. If a deal couldn't be made, they would publish the games anyways, as Hawkins felt the blowback from a company with so little market share as Sega seemed extremely unlikely. As development kits were sent out to developers who were under contract with Sega, EA was able to borrow one from an unknown developer to verify the development machine they had created, called the Sprobe, was as accurate as possible. EA had seen the Genesis as a prime platform for their Madden series and had planned a December launch of the game with or without a license from Sega. After comparing development kits, things looked to be on track. At the 1990 Summer CES show, Trip Hawkins informed Michael Katz about Madden and their intentions to not only release a large number of games on the Genesis without a license, but also give away the information to other companies that would allow them to do the same if Sega didn't agree to EA's terms. Sega caved, and as part of the agreement, EA was allowed to manufacture their own carts and packaging. The carts were a bit taller than the standard Genesis ones, containing a yellow grip tab on one side, giving them a fairly distinctive look. The first 7 games originally came in cheaply made cardboard boxes, with a switch to a Sega-style clamshell for the remainder of their releases. During the same time, Activision, known as Metagenic at the time, had been tapped to develop and design the Montana game for Sega. At the same summer CES show, the game was previewed and everything looked to be on track, but by late September it was clear that the work on the game had barely progressed past what was originally shown. This was a disaster for Sega, even leading to serious conversations of pulling the system off of the market and relaunching at a later date when the games were available to back the massive marketing campaign they were depending on. Upon learning of the Metagenic debacle, Katz would spend the following days calling every developer that had potential of pulling off the project, including Park Place Productions, the same developer who ported the Madden series to the Genesis for Electronic Arts. Co-founder Michael Knotts turned down the offer due to what he felt was a conflict of interest, along with a strong desire to maintain a good relationship with EA. With no other options available, Michael Katz picked up the phone and placed a call to Trip Hawkins. His message was clear: without EA's support, Sega would pull the Genesis from the market, potentially bankrupting EA in the process. If EA chose to help, Sega would sweeten the deal they had already reached at the summer CES. For Hawkins, the decision was a no-brainer.
Electronic Arts had, I think, 11 games on the Genesis that they would have had to cancel, and they would have gone out of business because they would have lost all their investment money for that year on all the Sega products that they had dedicated the company to. They had to deliver a game to Sega so it would open up the market again and continue forward.
Sega and EA would settle on a deal allowing the use of the John Madden football game engine. The developer of John Madden was tasked with reworking the game into Joe Montana football. By January, the game was finished and released to the public. Enough changes were made that it's hard to tell that the two games are as closely related as they are. As part of the final agreement, the royalty was dropped from $15 per game to $2 per game with a $2 million cap. This would save EA $35 million over the course of the system's life as they went on to publish over 100 games on the Genesis. Even though Michael Katz paved the way forward for Sega to succeed in North America and had met the requirements set by Sega of Japan, Nakayama didn't feel the money spent was seeing the returns it should. The sales for the system in Nakayama's mind were lackluster, and he began to feel that Katz just wasn't the right man for the job. Only 14 months after taking the position as president, Nakayama let Michael Katz go and replaced him with Tom Kalinske. Special thanks to Michael Katz for taking the time to chat with me in preparation for this episode. I also want to thank Stika, Wrestling with Gaming, and Historic Nerd for lending voice support. If you enjoyed this video, then you will most certainly enjoy their content, and I recommend that you check out each of their channels via the links I left in the description. Join me next time as we explore the early Kalinske years and Sega's relationship with Accolade. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. Click subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in staying updated on upcoming projects and channel news, follow me on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Jenovi and this has been Retro Impressions and Reviews.